Congratulations and welcome new C-Store cashier trainees. My name is Brandon Petway and today I am hosting this webinar entitled the C-Store Communicative Pathways Trainee Webinar to teach you about some of the pathways of communication used in the C-Store by workers to help ease some of your anxiety that you may have regarding this journey that you're about to embark on. First, let me begin by giving a little background about myself so that you can be aware that I am a credible source. I am a senior in public and interpersonal communication at North Carolina State University. I am currently enrolled in Com 456, which is organizational communication. Also, previous to this webinar, I also completed a network analysis in which I discussed many of the topics that I will discuss today. Last but not least, I was also sitting where you are only 7 months ago when I was hired by the C-Store, and I am now a student supervisor. So now that we have the formalities out of the way, let's transition now to the reason why we are here. The focus of this webinar is pathways of communication. More specifically, I will focus on advising you on how this particular organization already communicates effectively. My first topic will be formal roles, where I will address the type of formal communication pathway that is used most within this particular organization. The second topic will be informal pathways of communication. Lastly, the third topic will be information distortion, and this section will mainly inform the trainee of how it occurs within the C-Store and how it can be avoided. The end goal of this webinar is to give new trainees of the C-Store a better opportunity at being successful within the organization and lessen their anxiety about their first day of work. I'm sure we all know that pathways of communication are important within any organization. According to Braden in her article, which is entitled Effective Organizational Communication, for an organization to be successful, it must have employees capable of sending and receiving information quickly, clearly, effectively, and error-free. There are two pathways of communication, which are formal and informal. The first one that I will explain is the formal pathway of communication that applies to the C-Store. Formal pathways refer to communication through designated channels of message flow between different positions in an organization. This type of communication is normally listed in policy manuals that you receive when you first join an organization. In many organizations, this type of communication could also be implicitly known by members. There are multiple formal pathways of communication, but the one that is primarily used at the C-Store is downward pathway. According to Braden, downward communication is communication that flows from upper levels, for example, managers and superiors, to lower levels, which would be cashiers or subordinates. Messages that would be passed down through this chain of command would be related to new policies, job instructions, and feedback on your performance. For example, when a new product is about to be released or is even being thought about, the higher up management knows first, and by the time cashiers and lower level supervisors find out, it is already on the shelf. Now that I have explained the formal pathway of communication that is used within the C-Store, take a moment and pause the webinar. While the webinar is paused, each trainee should take out a sheet of paper and write down 2 pros and 2 cons that they believe would come from this specific pathway of communication. You may now pause the webinar. Now that you have completed that activity, set the paper to the side as it will be needed later. Now let's move to the next topic, which is informal pathways of communication that occur within the C-Store. To understand informal communication, think about this quote, "I heard it through the grapevine." Basically, these are channels of communication that are not technically designated by the organization, but are used to reduce anxiety and advance within the organization. For example, on your first day of work, you may want to engage in conversation with your student supervisor about their major and future plans to help reduce your anxiety. For the next activity, pause the webinar again. Each trainee should write down a few things that they are anxious about or they may not understand when it comes to some of the policies they have read about. You may pause the webinar now. Now we will go into our final topic of discussion, which is information distortion. According to the article, the distortion of information during decisions and information distortion in other decision-making, information distortion is prevalent within a majority of organizations. Information distortion occurs in the same form that rumors do. One person says to do something or a policy is changed, and when it is taught by word of mouth, information may get left out or altered. An example of information distortion that occurred recently at the C-store deals with the new policy of wearing a hairnet or a hat. For some time, many C-store workers did not know at what points they had to be worn. When different people were asked, different answers were given. For the next activity, pause the webinar again, and each trainee should take a minute or two and write down some ways that they would help prevent information distortion from occurring. You may pause the webinar now. I would like to now give you an example that encompasses all of the theories I have spoken about today to help you better understand how they all work together. I will read the example twice, and then you should pause the webinar. At this point, the trainees should pick out which part is formal pathway, informal pathway, and information distortion. The best example I can think of is the application of new rules and regulations. Here is the example. Top managers put new rules and regulations into place, but a lot of times, not all employees are told at once. So the ones who are unaware find out from other workers. When they find out, a lot of times they are told wrong. I will now read it once again, and don't forget to pause it after this time. Here's the example. Top managers put new rules and regulations into place, but a lot of times, not all employees are told at once. So the ones who are unaware find out from other workers. When they find out, a lot of times they are told wrong. Pause now. Now that you have resumed, I will confirm the answers for you. Top managers put new rules and regulations into place, but a lot of times not all employees are told at once. This is an example of formal pathway. So the ones who are unaware find out from other workers. This is an example of informal pathways. When they find out, a lot of times they are told wrong. This is an example of information distortion. For the final activity, each trainee should discuss with the group their findings from each of the 3 previous activities that you did on paper. You may pause the webinar now. I am glad that you have taken part in this webinar, and I hope that you have gained a great deal of knowledge about the communicative structure of the C-store, because as the article Unwrapping the Organization Entry Process points out, those, meaning newcomers or in this case trainees, who have accurate information about all aspects of the job will be better able to assess the extent to which they will fit in their new positions and will be in situations that better match their abilities and preferences compared with those who decide to take the job with little to no background information. Once again, thank you for your time, and as always, go Pack!